Sana had always dreamed of becoming a journalist, not just any journalist, but the kind who tells the stories others are afraid to tell. She didn't want to sit in an office and rewrite press releases. She wanted to be in the field, meeting people, hearing voices from the ground, and bringing truth to light. From a young age, she had been curious, brave, and maybe a little stubborn. Her parents always said she asked too many questions, but it was that same curiosity that had helped her build a career one step at a time. Now, at 27, Sana was finally getting the chance she had waited years for. Her editor had assigned her to cover a sensitive story about displaced families in a conflict zone near a rural border area. It was a place most reporters avoided, too dangerous, too unpredictable. But Sana had said yes without hesitation. She believed that these were the stories that truly mattered, the ones that gave a voice to the forgotten. The night before her journey, she couldn't sleep. She packed her bag carefully, clothes, a camera, notebooks, an old voice recorder, her press pass, and a USB drive with backup files. She also carried a letter from her editor that explained her assignment. She checked everything twice, then once more for good measure. Her mother watched from the doorway, worried but silent. Her father walked her to the gate in the early morning and gave her a small prayer book. "Just in case," he said. She smiled and tucked it into her side pocket. The road to the checkpoint was long and dusty. Sana sat in the back of a small hired jeep, bouncing over potholes and uneven dirt paths. Villages passed by quiet, tired-looking homes, goats tied near doorways, and barefoot children chasing one another with sticks. Every time they stopped for fuel or water, she noticed the stares. A woman traveling alone, especially to that region, was rare, but she kept her head high and stayed focused. As the jeep neared the checkpoint, the driver grew nervous. "Madame, this area—" "Not good," he said softly. Sana nodded. She had done her research. This checkpoint was known for being harsh. The guards there often operated like their own small army. Rules changed based on mood, and there were whispers of bribes, detentions, even people being turned away for no clear reason. Still, she had all the right documents. She wasn't doing anything illegal. She told herself that everything would be fine. When the checkpoint came into view, her heart started beating faster. A row of makeshift tents and a rusted iron barrier blocked the road. Armed men stood around lazily, some smoking, some arguing with travelers. There were no women in sight, except for a few elderly ones, sitting on the side of the road, holding babies or baskets. The driver pulled over slowly, his hand slightly shaking as he stepped out. Sana took a deep breath, adjusted her scarf, and stepped out of the jeep. The dust clung to her shoes as she walked toward the main inspection table. One guard looked up and stared at her for a few seconds too long. She kept walking. "Where are you going?" Soldier barked. "I'm a journalist," she said, handing over her press pass and the editor's letter. "Why have permission?" The guard glanced at the paper without reading it properly, then turned to another officer. They exchanged words in low tones. Then one of them, taller and rough-looking, walked up to her. "Open your bag," he said flatly. "Of course," she said, trying to stay calm. She placed her bag on the wooden table and unzipped it. But before she could start showing the contents, the officer snatched it from her hands and dumped everything onto the table in one rough motion. Her clothes, pens, makeup pouch, notebooks, power bank, even her personal sanitary items, all were exposed in the open. A small crowd of curious people gathered around. She felt her face flush with embarrassment, but she didn't say anything. Officers began going through every item with exaggerated suspicion. They held up her undergarments with 2 fingers like it was something dirty, then dropped them back on the pile. One officer picked up her camera and started pressing buttons, like he was looking for a hidden weapon. Another found her small black pouch, the one she always used to keep personal things, a USB drive, a few old photographs, and a folded letter written in a local dialect. "What is this?" the officer asked sharply, holding up the pouch. "It's my backup data and some photos from a previous assignment," she explained. "And that letter is a testimony from a local person I interviewed last month." The officer's eyes narrowed. "This USB, it's encrypted." "Yes," she admitted. To protect interviewees. He turned to the other guards.
Jeez.
Hiding something. Not hiding anything, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. We'll see, he muttered. She could feel things turning. The tone of the guards had changed. They were no longer just doing a routine check. They were digging for something. Maybe power. Maybe a reason to detain her. Maybe just to feel important. One of the soldiers stepped back and began whispering into a radio. It's not his stomach twisted. People behind her in the queue started murmuring. Some laughed, others just stared. Her life's work, her documents, her tools, her dignity, all scattered across a dusty table in the middle of nowhere. She felt helpless, but she knew better than to raise her voice. Any wrong move could escalate the situation. She began gathering her belongings slowly, hoping someone in authority would step in. But the guards weren't done. One of them took the USB and walked into a tent behind the checkpoint. "We'll check this," he said coldly. Sana stood frozen. What could they do with it? Could they accuse her of espionage? Could they damage her work? Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw someone emerging from the tent. An older officer, not dressed like the others. His uniform was cleaner, and his posture was straighter. He walked slowly toward the table, saying nothing at first. Others stood aside as he approached. He looked at the mess on the table, then at Sana. She stared back. Unsure of what to expect, the air felt still for a moment. Then he leaned slightly toward the officer holding her pouch and whispered something. She couldn't hear. The officer's body stiffened. There was a pause, and he backed off and said simply, "She's clear." Sana blinked in disbelief. The older officer picked up the USB drive, looked at it briefly, then gently placed it back on her pile of things. "You may go," he said, his voice calm but firm. She quickly gathered her belongings. Her heart was still pounding. She zipped her bag and turned to leave. The officer said one more thing. Not loudly, almost in a whisper. "You don't remember me, do you?" Sana stopped. Her eyes met his again. Something about his face. But she couldn't place it. And before she could ask, he turned away and walked back into the tent. She walked. Back to the Jeep, still in shock. The driver looked at her, surprised she got through so quickly. "What happened?" He asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. But in her heart, she knew this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something strange, something personal, something she couldn't explain yet. As the Jeep drove off and the checkpoint disappeared in the distance, Sana couldn't help but look back once. That officer's voice stayed in her mind. "You don't remember me, do you?" And she knew she would have to remember, because something important had just happened. Something that would change everything. Sana sat quietly in the Jeep, looking out the window, but her mind was not calm. Her hands were shaking a little as she held her bag close to her chest. The driver, sensing her tension, didn't speak. He just drove slowly, careful not to hit. Any bumps on the rough path? Sana kept thinking about what had just happened at the checkpoint. It's the way they had pulled everything out of her bag like she was a criminal. The way strangers had watched her personal things scattered on the dirty table. And then the sudden whisper from the senior officer, "Stand down," was a strange moment, sharp, quick, but powerful enough to stop everything. She didn't know what was more confusing, the humiliation of being searched like that, or the officer's sudden change in attitude. Who was he? Why had he protected her? And what did he mean by, "You don't remember me, do you?" as the Jeep continued. Through the dry landscape, Sana took out a bottle of water and sipped it slowly. She tried to calm her mind. She told herself to focus on her work. That's why she had come here, after all, to report the real story of the family's suffering on the border. But something inside her kept replaying that moment. The officer's eyes, his calm but intense voice, and the strange feeling in her chest when he looked at her. It was like a part of her memory was trying to open, but the door was still locked. 2 hours later, the Jeep stopped in a small village that was acting as a relief center. There were tents set up near an old school building. Children ran barefoot, their faces covered in dust. Women sat in groups, washing clothes or cooking on open fires. Sana adjusted her scarf and stepped out of the vehicle. A volunteer came to greet her. His name was Navid. He had been informed that a journalist was coming and was ready to help. Naveed showed her around. These families, he said, pointing to the tents, came from across the border. They've lost everything. Homes, land, even some family members. Sana took out her notebook and pen. She nodded slowly, listening carefully. She didn't start asking questions right away. First, she sat with a group of women and shared a cup of tea. She knew that sometimes building trust was more important than rushing for quotes. One woman, named Farzana, told her how her son had disappeared during the fighting. We searched for days, she said, tears rolling down her face. But we only found his slipper near the river. Sana's heart broke quietly inside. These were the voices she wanted the world to hear. The ones buried under noise and politics. She spent the rest of the afternoon interviewing people, recording their stories and taking photographs. But in the back of her mind, the incident at the checkpoint refused to go away. That evening, as the sun began to set, she sat alone on a broken step outside the school building. Her bag was beside her, carefully zipped now. She took out the USB drive and stared at it. It was the same drive the officer had held in his hand. What if he had not told them to stop? What if they had deleted her files or arrested her for false charges? The more she thought about it, the more she felt a strange chill. Something had protected her, or rather someone. Suddenly she heard a voice behind her. Tough day. Was Naveed. He handed her a bottle of water and sat down beside her. Sana nodded. These stories, they stay with you, he agreed. Sometimes too much. After a short silence, she asked, who runs the checkpoint back there? The one near the river. Naveed raised his eyebrows. That one? It's controlled by a special unit. It's not regular army, not local police either. They report directly to the regional security office. Why? I was stopped there, she said, and something strange happened. He looked curious. Kind of strange? They searched me like I was hiding something, she said quietly. Pulled out everything. But then an officer came out, whispered to the others, and they stopped. Naveed was quiet for a moment. That doesn't happen. Often. Usually, if they start checking, they don't stop unless they find a bribe or make trouble. That's what I thought, Sana said. But this officer, he said something before I left. He said I didn't remember him. Naveed looked. Surprised you think he knew you? I don't know, she replied. But I think I've seen him before. His face, it felt familiar. That night, Sana couldn't sleep. She kept turning in her bed, thinking about his face. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine the scene again. The way he walked, the way he looked at her. Then suddenly, a memory flashed in her mind, brief but clear. A young boy sitting under a broken bridge, bleeding from his arm, scared and alone. And a younger version of herself, maybe 17 or 18, was holding his hand and trying to stop the bleeding. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. Could it be? Was that boy now the officer at the checkpoint? Years ago, during her college days, she had volunteered in a flood relief camp. One day she had been sent to a remote area where a bridge had collapsed. Many people were stranded. He had helped an injured boy who was separated from his family. He had been frightened, and she had sat with him for hours until help arrived. She had even given him her shawl because he was shivering. She never saw him again after that. But now, the possibility felt so strong that she couldn't ignore it. The next morning, she asked Naveed if he knew anyone who could confirm the name of the officer. That's difficult, he said. They keep those things private. But sometimes the officer visits the village to check on security. When? Could be tomorrow, could be next week, he said. But he usually comes alone, early in the morning. Sana decided to wait. She had already collected most of her interviews, but something inside her told her not to leave just yet. 3 days later, it happened. She was sitting near the well with a group of women when she saw a familiar face walking into the village. Same uniform, same calm expression. It was him. She stood up quickly and walked toward him. He saw her too. There was a silence between them as they stood face to face. You came, she said. He nodded. I usually check on the village. She didn't waste time. Was it you? Under that bridge, years ago? He looked at her for a few seconds, then smiled softly. Yes, I was 12. You gave me your shawl. Sana felt tears in her eyes. I didn't recognize you. I remembered you the moment I saw your name on the tag, he said. That day you waited with me. You stayed when everyone else ran. I never knew what happened to you after. I joined the academy, he said. Worked hard. Got posted here last year. When I saw them ripping through your bag, I couldn't let it happen. She felt something powerful in that moment. Not just relief, but a deep realization. A small act of kindness she had done years ago had come back to protect her in the most unexpected way. They sat on a bench near the mosque and talked more. He told her how he had lost his parents in the flood, how life had been hard, and how that one moment of kindness had stayed with him all these years. That day, he said, you made me feel human again. Sana didn't know what to say. She just listened. When they finally stood up to leave, he said, be careful. Not everyone out here is as forgiving. She smiled. And not everyone out here remembers kindness. But I'm glad you did. As he walked away, Sana looked at the village around her. The stories she had come to tell were still important. But now, she had another story. One she hadn't expected. A story not about war, not about disaster, but about memory, kindness, and the invisible threads that connect lives in the most surprising ways. And deep in her heart, she knew this was the beginning of something she would never forget. Sana was still trying to understand what had happened at the checkpoint. The way that older officer appeared suddenly and told the others to stand down still played in her mind like a slow video. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just whispered those two words, and everyone obeyed. In that moment, the entire atmosphere changed. 1 second, they were treating her like a criminal. The next, they backed off, returned her things, and let her go like nothing had happened. But it wasn't just about authority. It was something deeper. He looked at her with a kind of familiarity, as if he knew her. And that soft question before she left, you don't remember me, do you? Kept echoing in her head. That night, Sana lay awake in the guest room of the village relief center. The fan above her made a dull noise, and crickets outside sang in the darkness. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but her mind was digging through old memories like a child searching through a dusty attic. She was trying to remember all the faces she had seen in her life, all the people she had helped, spoken to, passed by without thinking. Where had she met him? Why would he remember her? She got up from bed quietly and went to her bag. She pulled out a small diary, something she always carried while reporting. It wasn't for notes about interviews. It was her personal journal. Its pages full of thoughts, sketches, old moments. She flipped through them slowly, looking for anything, any mention, any clue. Her hand stopped when she found a page from many years ago. The handwriting was young, a little crooked. There were only a few lines. Today I met a boy under the broken bridge. He was hurt and scared. I gave him my shawl. He didn't say much, but he held my hand tightly. I hope he finds his family. She stared at the words. That moment was real. She had written about it. Now it was coming back. In her memory, she saw the broken bridge, the mud, the rising water, and a boy, small, bleeding, holding on to her. Hand as she tried to stop the bleeding on his leg using her own scarf. He had tears in his eyes but didn't cry loudly. He just kept whispering, Amy, Amy, like he was calling out for his mother. She remembered staying with him until help arrived. It had been such a small act. She hadn't expected anything from it. But now, years later, that same boy had become a man in uniform and had returned her kindness at a time she needed it most. The next morning, Sana woke up early. She couldn't stop thinking about him. She wanted to know more. She wanted to understand what he had been through all these years. How had a flood victim become a respected officer? What had life given and taken from him in between? After breakfast, she walked to the main street of the village. Naveed, the volunteer from the relief camp, greeted her again. Naveed, she said, can I ask you for a favor? Of course, he replied. That officer, she said. It's the one who visited the village yesterday. Do you know his name? Naveed thought for a moment. Yes, his name is Samir. Officer Samir Qureshi. Ah, he's in charge of the regional checkpoint. Very disciplined. Doesn't take bribes. Not many like him in this area. Do you think I could meet him again? She asked. He raised an eyebrow. Why? I think I knew him when he was a child. I want to talk to him. Naveed didn't ask more questions. He just nodded. He usually returns to the checkpoint by noon. I can arrange a message to be sent. Later that day, a local boy delivered a note to the checkpoint. It was simple. I remembered. Can we talk? Sanashi waited near the same checkpoint where everything had happened. She stood under the shadow of a tree, watching the soldiers go about their duties. No one looked at her. She was just another face. Then, after almost an hour, Samir stepped out of the tent. He walked toward her. Calm and silent, just like before. I wasn't sure if you'd come back, he said. I wasn't sure either, she replied. But I remembered, gave a small smile. The bridge. She nodded. You were bleeding. I wrapped your leg. You were so small, I remember, he said quietly. You were wearing a green shawl. Her eyes widened. You remember that? I kept it for years, he said, until it got too old and worn. My mother, she was gone by the time the rescue team found me. But I always remembered that you stayed. Sana didn't know what to say. The emotion in his voice was soft, controlled, but real. I became a reporter to tell stories that matter, she said. But I never thought I'd become part of a story like this. Samir looked out toward the hills. After the flood, I was sent to a shelter. Then to a foster home. It wasn't easy, but I worked hard. I studied, joined cadet school, then the academy. Discipline gave me strength, but I always kept your face in mind. You were the first person who didn't look at me with pity, Sana. Felt tears in her eyes. You didn't deserve pity. You were just a child in pain, and you were just a student, he said. But you showed courage. They sat on a nearby bench. The noise of the checkpoint faded in the background. It felt like they were in their own small world. I had no idea you'd be the one to help me at that checkpoint, she said. It's strange how life circles back. It does, he agreed. Sometimes when you least expect it. Sana looked at him seriously. You changed everything in that moment. I don't even know what could have happened if you didn't step in. Samir nodded. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because you didn't deserve to be treated like that. You were just doing your job, and I knew that if I stayed silent, I'd regret it. They sat in silence for a moment. The wind blew gently, lifting dust into the air. Do you believe in fate? Sana asked. Samir thought for a moment. I believe in choices. But sometimes life gives you a chance to return something. And if you miss it, you might never get that chance again. Sana smiled. Then I'm glad you took it. Before she left, she asked, Can I tell your story one day? Not with your name, but the story of a child who became a protector. Samir looked at her. Only if you include the part where a girl gave up her shawl to save a boy she didn't even know? Promise, she said. That evening, as Sana returned to the village, she felt something inside her shift. She had come to report on pain, loss, and survival. But what she found was deeper than that. She found a piece of her past waiting quietly in a dusty uniform behind a checkpoint. She found that even in the middle of a harsh world, the smallest acts of kindness could grow into something strong, something lasting, and she knew, without doubt, that some stories don't begin when we write them. They begin when we care, when we help. Doubt, when we stay, even for one frightened child under a broken bridge. Sana couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she had with Samir. That quiet meeting near the checkpoint had opened a door to a memory she didn't know still existed in her heart. When she walked back to the village that evening, her steps felt lighter, but her mind was full of thoughts. She kept seeing the little boy's face under the broken bridge, and now that face had grown into a man in uniform. It was hard to believe, but it was real. Life had brought them back together in the most unexpected way. That night, she sat alone under the open sky. Stars blinked above her, and the village was mostly silent except for the soft sound of distant crickets and a baby crying somewhere in a nearby tent. She took out her diary again and turned to a blank page. She began writing slowly. Kindness is a strange thing. You never know where it ends. You give a little piece of it, and years later, it might return to you in a way you never imagined. She stopped for a second and looked around. She had been in many places, cities, towns, war zones, but this small, dusty village, with its broken houses and hurting people, was starting to feel like the most meaningful stop in her journey. It's not just because of her reporting, but because of something deeper. A full circle had completed itself here. The next morning, Sana returned to the relief area and resumed her work. There were still stories to be collected, voices that needed to be heard. She met a young girl who had lost both parents and now lived with her grandmother. She spoke softly and held a picture of her mother that had been folded so many times it had almost turned white. There was an old man who told her about how his fields were burned, and he had to walk for 2 days with his animals just to reach safety. Sana listened with full attention. Every person had pain. Every person had strength. And behind every story was a face that deserved to be seen. But even as she interviewed people and recorded their experiences, her thoughts kept drifting back to Samir. She began to wonder how he had survived those early years. He had lost his mother. He had been placed in a shelter. What was it like for a 12-year-old boy to grow up in a world where everything had been taken from him? Sana decided she wanted to know more, not just because of curiosity, but because something inside her wanted to understand his story completely. She didn't want it to remain just a mysterious memory. She wanted to know how that frightened child had turned into the man who had protected her. She asked Naveed again, "Do you know anyone who knew Samir when he was a child?" "Someone from the rescue teams during the flood." Naveed thought for a moment. There was a nurse, Sister Rahila. She worked in the flood zone clinics. She's retired now, but she lives not far from here. Sana asked if he could take her to see the nurse. Later that afternoon, they drove to a small village, about 30 minutes away. The road was narrow, and the houses looked old but clean. Flowers grew in front of simple clay homes. Naveed stopped in front of a white house with blue windows. A kind-looking woman, in her late 60s, opened the door. "Yes," she asked politely. "I'm Sana," she said. "I'm looking for Sister Rahila." "That's me," she replied. "I'm a journalist," Sana explained. "I wanted to ask you about a boy you may have treated years ago, during the big flood." Rahila nodded slowly. "I treated many children. So much pain during those days. But I'll try to remember." Sana took out her notebook and began describing Samir's case to Broken Bridge. The injury, the young boy separated from his mother. The nurse's eyes softened. "Yes," she said finally. "I remember him. He had a cut on his leg and a deep silence in his eyes. He didn't cry much, but he kept holding a green scarf." Sana felt a chill run through her. "That scarf. It was mine." Rahila looked at her in surprise. You? You were the girl who stayed with him?" Sana nodded. "I didn't know what happened to him after the rescue," Rahila smiled. "He was very quiet but very sharp. We sent him to a children's shelter. Years later, I heard he had joined the academy. It made me proud." Sana felt something deep move inside her. She thanked the nurse and left quietly. The ride back to the village was silent, both of them lost in thought. That night, she finally sat down with her recorder and began telling the story, not for the newspaper, not for her editor, but for herself. She spoke slowly, honestly, pouring her emotions into the microphone. "There was once a boy, broken and forgotten, sitting under a bridge. I sat with him because no one else did. I never thought I'd see him again, but I did. He was the man who stopped others from breaking me in the same way," he remembered, "and I almost didn't." She saved the file and labeled it, "The Boy Who Remembered." The next morning, she went back to the checkpoint one last time. She waited near the same bench where they had spoken before. When Samir saw her, he walked over quietly. "I found out more," she said with a smile. "I met Sister Rahila." Looked surprised but pleased. "She took care of me, I know," she replied. "She remembers the scarf." They both smiled. It was a quiet moment full of meaning. "Samir," she said gently, "you turned your pain into strength. That's not easy." He looked down, then back at her. "I had no choice." The world doesn't wait for broken people. But I held on to that memory. It kept me human. Sana nodded, and now that memory saved me. They stood together for a while, not needing to say much. Then Sana reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I brought you something," she said. He opened the cloth and found a new shawl green, soft and simple. "You gave the old one back to time," she said. "Here's one to remind you that kindness never ends." Samir didn't speak. He just nodded, his eyes holding something between gratitude and peace. Sana left that day with a full heart. Her reporting was complete. Her recordings were ready. And her story, both personal and professional, was richer than she ever imagined. She had come to tell the story of refugees, and she had. But she had also discovered a deeper truth. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we lived, without knowing they were stories at all, and sometimes the hands we hold for just a moment hold on to us forever. Sana returned to the city after finishing her reporting in the village. The road back home was long, filled with silence and thoughts. She looked out the window of the Jeep, watching the dry fields and distant hills pass by. But her mind wasn't on the scenery. It was on the people she had met, the stories she had heard, and the face of the officer she now knew as Salmirth, the boy under the bridge, who had grown into a protector. She reached her apartment late in the evening. The city lights blinked like stars, but they didn't feel warm like the stars she had seen above the village. As she stepped inside, she felt both comfort and loneliness. Her home was neat, her books were in place, and everything smelled familiar. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't just the same journalist anymore. She had returned with more than just notes and recordings. She had returned with a memory that had come to life, a truth that had touched her deeply. Sana placed her bag on the table and slowly unpacked. She took out her camera, her voice recorder, her notebook saw, tools of her work. But then she paused. She reached into the side pocket of her bag and pulled out the green shawl she had given to Samir. He had folded it and returned it to her before she left, saying, "You keep this now. I don't need it anymore. It already gave me what I needed." His words had stayed with her like a quiet echo. She held the shawl close for a moment before placing it gently in her wardrobe. The next few days were busy. She went to the office, submitted her report, and handed in the files. Her editor was impressed. "This is powerful work, Sana," he said. "It's not just about the crisis. It's about the people." "You made it human," she smiled, but her thoughts were somewhere else. She had left out one part of the story, the checkpoint incident. The way the guards had torn through her bag, the whisper that changed everything. The face of the officer who had stopped it all. She hadn't included it in her article not because it wasn't important, but because it wasn't meant for the world to see. That story belonged to her and Samir. It was not just news, it was memory, history, and something that lived quietly in the background of her life. One evening, as she sat on her balcony, drinking tea and watching the sky turn from orange to dark blue, she took out her recorder and played the voice file she had labeled "The Boy Who Remembered." Her own voice came through, soft and thoughtful. She had recorded it in the village late at night. When the world was sleeping, there was once a boy, broken and forgotten, sitting under a bridge. I sat with him because no one else did. I never thought I'd see him again, but I did. He was the man who stopped others from breaking me in the same way. He remembered, and I almost didn't. She closed her eyes and let the words settle in her heart. That story was not for the public. It was for her to remind herself of who she was and what truly mattered. Over the next few weeks, Sana continued her work. She interviewed more people, wrote more articles, and stayed busy. But she also began to notice something different in the way she approached her stories. Earlier, she used to focus only on facts, timelines, numbers, and incidents. But now, she looked deeper. She looked for the emotion behind the eyes of the people she met. She listened not just to words, but to the silences between them. One day, she visited a shelter for flood victims in another part of the country. As she walked through the rows of tents, she saw a small girl sitting alone, hugging a torn cloth doll. The girl looked up at her, afraid, unsure. Sana slowly sat down beside her and smiled. "Hi," she said gently. "What's your name?" The girl didn't reply, just stared. Sana reached into her bag and pulled out a colorful hair clip. "Here," she said. "It's for you." The girl took it slowly, and a small smile appeared on her face. In that moment, Sana remembered the day she had sat under a bridge with a frightened boy. She realized that sometimes the smallest moments of kindness become the biggest memories. She didn't know what the girl would become years later. Maybe she would forget her face. Maybe not. But the act of staying, of caring, would leave its own mark. Weeks passed, and Sana received a letter, an actual handwritten letter, something rare in the world of emails and text messages. It was from Samer. Sana. I hope this letter finds you well. I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say, but I'll try anyway. After you left, I kept thinking about our meeting. I never believed in luck before, but maybe there is such a thing as a right moment. I wanted to thank you again, not just for staying with me back then, but for remembering. The checkpoint is still the same. The dust, the heat, the long lines. But now every time I stop someone, I ask myself, what if this person is someone's Sana? It helps me stay human in a place where it's easy to forget. Take care, Samir. **** Sana read the letter again and again. It made her smile, but it also made her think. There were thousands of people out there, guards, travelers, refugees, strangers, and everyone was carrying something from their past. A pain, a kindness, a memory that shaped them. She decided to start a new project, not for the newspaper, but for herself. She began writing personal essays, stories of people she had met, without names or headlines, just emotions. She called the series The Ones We Forget. In the first one, she wrote, there are people we pass every day without knowing their story, but sometimes one of them returns to us not as a stranger, but as a memory that saved us. That story wasn't about war, politics, or power. It was about the invisible connections that shape our lives. A journalist who once gave a shawl, a boy who never forgot, a moment of protection that came from the past. One day, months later, she visited the same village again, not for work, just because she wanted to. When she arrived, some of the people recognized her. The children ran to her, the women smiled, and Navid greeted her warmly. You came back, he said. I had to, she replied. She walked through the village slowly, remembering each corner, each face. She sat by the same well, and for a long time, she just listened to the wind, the voices. Later that evening, she saw Samir again. He was not in uniform. He'd come to check on a water issue, dressed in a simple shirt and pants. When he saw her, he looked surprised but happy. You're back, he said. Yes, she replied. Sometimes we don't finish our stories. The first time, they sat down together under a tree. No reporters, no questions, no notebooks. Just two people who had once shared a moment under a broken bridge and again near a dusty checkpoint. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones told in silence, through memory, through action. Through the quiet understanding between two souls who knew that one moment of kindness could change everything, Sana knew she would keep telling stories. She would write, report, and travel. But now she also knew something she hadn't before. The real impact of her work wasn't always in the headlines, but in the hearts of those she touched, sometimes without even knowing it. Because sometimes, the person you help today becomes the reason you are saved tomorrow, and that is a story worth remembering. Always.